Okay, so the first slide, when it will come up, is from Space Odyssey, 2001. And as the film begins, you probably remember the titles where it says that there has been an accident and there was an encounter with a phenomena. And the only message that they receive is that, my God, it's full of stars. And partly this is so representative of what we may be at the frontier of. And what people have been experiencing. And the gist, or the most important part in that aspect, is that we may not have the capacity or the language of expressing the encounter. We just may not have the vocabulary or perceptual capacity to articulate. It's something that I work with experts in the intuitive professional knowing. And some of it is pre-verbal, which means once they're doing their job, they actually know what to do, but they cannot articulate it why. So if I work with a surgeon who is an expert, for example, in heart surgery, and there will be another expert literally working just across the wall, and they would be doing similar procedures, but they would assume that the other surgeon does exactly the same thing, and they're performing similar approaches, but in fact, they will do things differently and think it's obvious to another expert. So they'll work side by side, but would never, ever share that expertise. And in fact, they would think that everybody should know that. So this is when the professionals become experts, but they don't know what they're experts in because they think it's obvious. So that's what we're dealing with, is where that we have this experience, but we are unable to articulate it because we don't have the language or we don't have the tools on how to transfer that knowledge or expertise. And as you know, the experience is very personal, and often you sit with somebody and you have just no way to translate what you have been through. And you really want to empathize to a degree that you can help the person, but there's nothing you can do. It's just so different and out of our range of experience. So what I want to say in this talk is just I want us to pay attention to the experience. So all of us are here today, synchronicities and coincidences and all of our experience have brought us here today. Specifically, it's not a coincidence. And every single drop, every single moment created your own ocean. So your life is like an ocean, and it's full of life. Some of it you don't even understand that it exists there. But as soon as, because it's sometimes too scary to dive into its depth, because we feel very alone once we are confronted with some of our deepest fears or even positive emotions that we don't know how to compartmentalize. So here I wanted just to say of what examples where the scientists and medical professionals thought the phenomena was actually in our human imagination. But in fact, these were real experiences. And until people connected and talked about it, they thought they were alone in that. And we know, well, I know, that astronauts especially have such a unique profession. And they treasure the possibility of actually working in space. But the irony is, although they're called astronauts, they spend in space just up to 5% of their entire professional career. So they're actually very much earthbound. So they will not do anything to compromise that possibility. So they will process and protect the integrity that might not get them on flight. They will even conjure documents. And there are some personal books that you can buy, autobiographies, where they say that they've forged documents in order to actually not have be removed from flight. Because obviously, they're conscious of safety, so they wouldn't compromise the mission. But so and being confronted with a psychologist, such as myself, who may, and there's always two groups of psychologists who work with astronauts, ones who work in training and those who are doing medical assessment, so as not to compromise the support that in order to support the enhanced performance, and also those who evaluate or evaluate in selection or medical committee, they are separate, so as not to have a conflict of interest. And so in this case, astronauts were experiencing flashes, and these flashes were not in the visual field, but they could see them. So this was, and they were not talking about it, because you don't want to be seeing stars, just like from Space Odyssey, right? And because then you might be removed from flight. So they kept this until they were able to share among themselves. And once they shared among themselves, they felt, they can't take all of them off the flight if they're all experiencing this phenomena, right? So there is a power in numbers. And then what was interesting is that although their experience was similar, they were experiencing slightly different things. So they would see this sparks and streaks or stars or even clouds, whether they have their eyes open or closed. And then once they got to once there was data and there was a way to look into and to brainstorm with a larger medical and physicists and understanding what the phenomena is, then it was classified and then was no longer a phenomena that they imagined, or could have been something wrong with them. So I have been fortunate actually to work with or have communicated with Al Worden, who was the Apollo 15 commander. And you would see that they are so genuinely open, but also they would be very conservative in what they would express. And all of these individuals are so tightly aware, that they need to have filters when they're talking and with whom they're speaking. And it's important to remember that. But what is interesting to me, that we had, over a dozen of astronauts that went to the moon. But have we actually heard genuine experience of what it is like looking back, apart from the photograph? Have they had the language to communicate the transformation that happened to them? In fact, a lot of them have been ostracized from family, societally, and they had to resort to drinking and being isolated because they could not communicate their experience. And you would not see that because these are strong men. They need to hold their frontier. They are heroes. But nobody prepared them, to be back from the moon. They were put into a bunker. Essentially, they couldn't touch their family, they couldn't hug them. Their family was afraid to hug them because they could have been harboring disease or bacteria or foreign life. So, coming back to that reality and kind of being literally behind the glass, that has affected them. Some of them lost their family, so there were divorces. And really, the people who dealt with it in a different capacity is one of them became a priest. One of them obviously started the Noetic Science Institute. And that's the person who really articulated what they were experiencing. But the majority of them went quiet because we just don't have the capacity or maybe ability to express that experience. We just, and we have no scientific way to capture that either. So another good example is synesthesia. So until, fairly recently, we're talking about, 30, 40 years, this was, even now, a lot of people don't know about this phenomena. It's when you're having various inputs through your sensory perception, and you have a possibility of experiencing, for example, sound as color, or in this book by an expert in synesthesia, Richard, who says that the man who tasted shapes. So you have the neurons work cross sensors, and you are experiencing the world not like other people. And that could be So seeing things by tasting things, or hearing things and seeing things in color. So like musicians see music, for example. But also, it also matches our other sensory, perceptual, and also cognitive understanding. So it's sort of like they have the world is colored in a completely different way. And if you have one pair of synesthesia where these cross sensors are matched together, you have 50% chance that you have another type of synesthesia, and you might not even be aware of that. There's a website you can go and test and see whether you do have synesthesia. And there are over 150 types of combination. But what's interesting is that all of us, according to science, have synesthesia when we're born. And because we don't use it, or because we don't have the necessity to expand that, but some traditional cultures, so native cultures, use that ability because they are communicating with the environment in a different capacity. So and it is a language. It's a way of observing and understanding environment that, in the modern times in the cities, we just don't need that. So obviously our system biologically is very efficient, so it doesn't want to waste resources. So if we don't use it, we lose it. It gets repurposed, and we are networked differently in the brain. What is also very interesting is that our intention has an effect. So this is a paper, actually I was surprised to find it on the CIA website that's been approved for release. And so this is 1988 by Dean Radin, who was, still is part of the noetic science, but he was a chief scientist. And so the experiment involved a microelectronic random number generator. So this is a scientific instrument that is considered to be most precise way, for example, to run a study where you will certainly not leave things to chance, and it will provide you, sort the people, sort the groups, sort the particles. They will set up an experiment to be a truly scientific, without a bias. But in fact, after running an experiment, people from the street would go to an experiment, and they would be able to affect a random number generator that considered to be precise, calibrated instrument. Not only that after publishing this work, where it says that in conclusion it says it's difficult to avoid the conclusion. I really like Dean, when Dean phrases things. It's got a really good language underlying and trying to put across a message, and saying that under certain circumstances, consciousness interacts with random physical systems. So it actually has an effect on electronic devices, but more so that the later experiments actually looked at that we can affect these instruments in the past. You, I, like all of us, can affect a random number generator to produce either zeros or ones by just thinking, going up for ones and going down for zeros. And you can go to an experimental room, and say that, and the data was already recorded by the random number generator, and you're doing an experiment today, but it was recorded yesterday. Then they'll uncover that recording, and it will correlate with what you were doing. So it will actually generate things in the past. So we can work across time. And you could do exactly the same in the future. And in fact, they've already had random number generators during the Twin Towers collapse. And there was an effect across the globe on random number generators. They were not generating randomly. So we have, and our intention, so when science says, that there's no human bias, or we have to remove the human bias, well, we can't. We have to come to terms with that. And in fact, I urge you to look that, we are part of that system, and we need to utilize that. Another interesting thing, which is very important for the UAP, but also for pilots, is unintentional blindness. And you might be familiar with this experiment where there is a setup, you'll watch a video and you have to watch how the ball is passed between people dressed in white T-shirts, and you have to calculate how many times. And the ball is passed 15 times. There's a significant portion of the people who are doing these experiments do not see gorilla walking right across the screen. So where we are paying attention, or where the experimenter who was setting up an experiment told you to pay attention to, where did the government told you to look, right? Where did your society brought you up to look or ignore? You would actually not see it. So if you want to ignore it, you will ignore it. But if you want to see it, you will also see it. So, and we need to work with those parameters, and we need to be cognizant of our abilities, and we need to have the humanity as part of the puzzle, understanding the UAP. There's no such thing that we can remove the human factor. We can't. We are the interacting element with the phenomena. So the intention has to be part of the picture, and we need to utilize our perception sensors and be cognizant of what we're intending. And we need to investigate and engage with the phenomena, understanding our abilities. In fact, the phenomena is helping us to discover our abilities and our potential. So the title of my talk is Observation is Data. And it's an enormous amount of data that would enrich our instruments, because we need to trust and learn from the pilots who are highly skilled. And just to give you a brief outline of why I feel that I have the right to say such things, because I had a fortunate journey sort of in the aviation domain, where I've met people and they have influenced me on how I perceive things, and they told me where to look. I guess, their intentions affected my perception and what I have developed. I have selected personnel, and I've seen how the selection then changed them by working in a particular culture, how it affected their behavior, and that behavior at work affected them at home. So I worked with Hercules pilots on the C-130J, converting them from an old cockpit to a new cockpit, and understanding that the automation, which is in a sense AI, has no capacity to read our mind, in a sense. So when they were saying, when Boeing and Lockheed Martin were shrinking the crew from 5 people, so including the master, who is a load master at the back of the aircraft, but there were 4 in the cockpit, and they were saying, look, you will be absolutely fine with 2 people going from 4 to 2, because the automation will do things for you. That will do the navigation, that will monitor the engines, that will be able to fly, and in fact, you'll have more time on your hands. But in actual fact, when we run the experiments, no, the navigation system doesn't know when you need to have the information about dropping particular cargo, for example. But the other pilot or the other engineer or the load master or a navigator knows exactly when to tell you, when you are able to absorb that information, be safe, and it would be timely, and there will be nothing extra said. And in fact, they will, it's like it's a one single organism in the cockpit. And the automation, we are amazing in trusting. So we're very open. And so we started to trust the automation, and problems happened. And there was a ghost in the cockpit that I've talked about in the conferences that pilots were not willing to talk about. And until they were strong in numbers, we did not know. And the aircrafts were falling out of the sky every single week. Okay? So this is important that we listen to them before accidents happen. And so I've led the other aspect, which has also greatly been affected by pilots that I worked with, because they've opened up and shared their inner experience about what they're processing and what they're paying attention to. And once I understood their pre-verbal I help them to articulate, because if you ask the pilot, how did the landing go? So fine. It's like, well, how can I improve the display from that? It's not enough data. So I needed another method to improve their performance. And Wright-Patterson Air Force Research Laboratory approached me, and they said they want to disseminate these findings on how to improve performance. And as Ryan would attest, and other pilots, is that to improve pilots' performance by 200%, which is meant they can do things twice as fast, it's really unheard of. But that's what you can do once you translate this pre-verbal intuitive knowledge from the professional. Okay, so I worked with many space agencies, and so what I'm here to say is that pilots have unique cognition, and we, as public, through our tax money, have actually invested in training them to be this amazing, perceptual, unique data, collecting, experts. And I'm very protective of pilots because I know what they go through in order to deliver you from A to B. In order not to be distracted and in order not to be overloaded by information that they should not need to know when they are taking you into approach and landing. And their situational awareness is unparalleled. But more so, they navigate not like majority of us, which is in a horizontal plane. They operate in a sphere. So if you go and sit in the cockpit, you will not see an airplane that would be slightly out of your horizontal plane. But the pilot would, because they're trained to do so. And more so, they're continuously anticipating problems. So they're watching the trajectory, and it happens in split of a second. So they could do this without thinking. It's beyond processing capacity, and what the experiments will tell you in the laboratory is just not what happens in real life. They're much faster than that. They're classifying and discarding unknown objects. They're dynamically problem solving and rapidly making decisions. But more so, because of that expertise, their personal life is affected. So they problem solve all the time. What could go wrong? What is my landing path? How can I do a turnaround? What the weather is like? Whom do I have on board, and so on. But they transfer this to life as well, to their personal life, and they do suffer because of that, because they always think of the bad consequences, not positive outcome. So they're unparalleled sensory perceptors. They continuously use their knowing and calculation and trajectories and anticipation, and they have precise consequences for every movement. So every single sense, thought, and emotion distracts them from doing their job. And it is a capacity that actually runs out, right? It is a finite resource, their attention. And if they're distracted and thinking, should I be seeing this? What should I be doing? Should I be reporting this? Will I be punished for this? And so on. That gets us as passengers into trouble. Yeah? So we don't want them to worry about that. We want them to do their job. We want them to tell us about their experience. We want them to actually tell us what that experience is, because they are doing their job, and more so that they are informing us about the experience, and none of us are up there. So they are the best source of information of that experience. But more so, our senses are not limited to 5. And we are not collecting that data, and it is a very valuable data in the UAP domain. So you can see here, there's 10 more type of proprioception or perception that can be used, and all of them, majority of us, can experience and articulate, but we don't have the language or data or science considering that these are real things that we can detect. But a lot of them, a lot of these perceptions are experienced during the in connection with the phenomena. And Gary yesterday said that we need to sample the ecosystem, and that's correct. The ecosystem is much larger than just a radar or just an instrument. So let's not shoot ourselves in the foot and lose this more sophisticated sensory data from the reliable and professional observer. We need to triangulate this human observation and the perspective. And Jacques was talking about that there is always a second bell curve. So this kind of category 7 of the phenomena of the event that is underreported. And that's not because people don't want to report it, they don't know how. They don't have the language to describe that experience. And so our objective is to look at this in terms of time, before, during, and after, because there is something happens before, and then there's something happens after the actual event. And we have this outer and inner data that all of it needs to be connected to for us to understand this transformation that has in our life circumstance. It is data. Also, Chris in the talk in Europe was talking about that contrary to skeptics, there's more information often makes conventional explanation harder, which is correct. But also, what is interesting there is that the more deeper we delve into it, the more precise questions we can form, or the more diverse links we can make. So it's like a neural network that allows us to form a better question. So the merit is here is worth looking in what the phenomena triggers in us. So by other person having experience with the phenomena, it gives me also transformation of the worldview. So the phenomena, although I'm not seeing it, I am affected by it. So we are all one big organism that are being now affected by the phenomena, and we need to take account for that. So how do we tap into that inner universe of the experience? And but I feel like the more we engage, that the more we'll learn about the actual phenomena, and we will explore who we are and what our potential, and actually what we are made of. You know, what fears do we have? Because it does bring very personal things. So I urge you to look at this film that is made by Stanislav, based on the sci-fi novel Stanislav Lem. It's called Solaris, and there is a Hollywood version of that, but it actually misses some of the very key concepts that are formed in there about the means of interacting and communicating with non-human intelligence. So that this very interesting quote by Carl Sagan that says that, who was a part of were interested in language of dolphins as another intelligent life. And he was saying that dolphins have been reported to learn English, but no human being has been reported to have learned Dolphinese. And I think we need to look at that paradigm, right? We need to be looking in what infrastructure and what senses we need to be used as communication or perception or understanding. And in the Solaris, this entity is an ocean. And what it does, it creates a human being, a physical human being that has actually passed away. And the reason, well, if you watch Russian films, there's never a resolution in the end, so you're left hanging. So be prepared for that, and it's really long, and you do fall asleep, so you might need to watch it several times. But there's a reason for that, right? Because those who are not attentive or not awake, you will not get the concept, right? So this is the point. The knowledge is hidden if we're not willing to delve into it. And so it brings this person to life who passed away. You know, a person who you deeply loved comes to life, and you cannot explain it. And the reason the phenomena is doing that is to explore, to communicate with us, to understand what our deepest feelings are. You know, they are so fundamentally personal and intimate that you cannot ignore a live person standing in front of you that you love dearly, who passed away, and they're right in front of you, but you know you can't take them back. And so the question in part of the movie that this entity is asking is that about love. You know, what is, and the commander is trying to, well, actually he's no commander, but one of the flight crew is saying that love is a feeling you can experience, but you can't explain. But that's the level of communication. So we need to think about what the phenomena actually has to offer to us. So part of what I'm very interested to do is that I'm collaborating with Ann Tyler, who is also a licensed psychologist, to empower pilots to integrate this experience, because I think there is this category 7 experiences that are beyond just seeing physical things, that transform us. And we need to delve into that and assist in that integration into our life. So watch that space. And so thank you so much.